Why human societies developed so little during 300k years. The sheer number of people with free time, and who are able to communicate long distances with others who share their interests, whether practical or frivolous, seems to often be left out of these discussions. Right now there are a billion people using electronic devices, engaged, productively or recreationally, with other human beings. The elite of ancient Rome, the people literate, with some free time, measured in perhaps the tens or hundreds of thousands. So 1 hour of our collective mental wankery today is equivalent to tens of thousands of hours of it in ancient Rome, assuming all other things were equal, which they are not. In other words, I don't think it's a coincidence things started changing rapidly after the invention of agriculture, when the human population started to steadily increase.
Agriculture took roughly 5,000 years to be adopted. I don't think it can be qualified as fast. There was back and forth, and things did not change rapidly for the better automatically. For millenaries, hunter-gathered were better fed than village dweller, from bones structures and trash analysis. Source: Grabber and Scott. Mostly against the grain. And debt, a history.
It always seems that we discover artifacts that push history farther back. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old, and I doubt hunter-gatherers made this. I think sophisticated societies existed well past what we have discovered, but time has made it exponentially difficult to get historical proof, except in bits and pieces.
Hunter-gatherers can make permanent sites for ritual use, where they occasionally all meet up, and then go back to being nomadic afterward.
Greater than able to communicate long distances with others who share their interests. The elite of ancient Rome, the people literate, with some free time, measured in perhaps the tens or hundreds of thousands. This does not require literacy. Culture and society evolved quite easily through word of mouth alone. Traveling people, be them official word spreaders or not, moved from one place to another very quickly. Songs spread quickly from tavern to tavern. News and culture always moved as fast as a horse-runner ship could carry it. Literacy cannot make a horse run any faster. Literacy only made communication faster, once the message could move faster than a physical object. Only with long-distance communication such as semaphore, and eventually electronic means. Literacy meant that culture became written down, often literally carved in stone. This codification most likely slowed its previous rapid evolution.
How does this apply to the article?
Unless I misread things, the article is about a hypothesis that before the current era, many tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans were in a stable population state, pre-Malthusian, and so most humans were mostly free of substantial food pressure. My own conjecture is that the material scientific intellectual process that seems to have started around the time of agriculture, and which has been accelerating ever since, until we're all sucked into this global mechanical survival process, is driven mostly by the number of people able to sit around and think about surviving in this runaway process. They face Malthusian pressure, they want and need more, and also their ease of communicating with each other. People pondering how to feed themselves more in large forums, come up with ways to transform the world physically through their collective labor. Such a runaway process would not likely occur in a small stable population without the pressure to do so in the first place.
The advantage of agriculture is not quite so clear. Early farming was barely more efficient, one farmer barely producing more than they themselves consumed. And the decrease in diversity of foodstuffs made them each individually less nourished, compared to the variety of berries and nuts the foragers would eat. Hunter-gatherer societies actually had lots of free time. Finding food wasn't a constant struggle. What farming societies had is organization of force, and a concept of land ownership.
Graeber and Wengrow contest that take severely with their survey of modern anthro and archaeological research. I recommend their papers or Dawn of Everything.
Scott Papers and Against the Grain book also spend several chapters on that.
Against the Grain just proves a dedicated Marxist can find applications of Marxism anywhere. It was those nasty powerful people who brutally suppressed the hunter-gatherers. Yeah, that was it.
Have you read the book? What I remember is that it took 5,000 years for the transition to happen, and that human went back and forth with the two systems. That was far from a black and white transition. Hunter-gatherer knew about farming, and were actually farming. Also, trash and bones of the two groups indicate that farming was more subject to instability and shortage of nutrients. As backward as it sounds for us. Where does the Marxism come into play?
I read enough to get the idea, which was, power over other humans and the desire to exploit them is the only reason anything happens, including agriculture. Hence, Marxism. Once you as author let it slip that you're only interested in furthering an agenda, you lose all credibility. Because I know that you won't present any evidence that works against that agenda.
Right now there are 1 billion people using electronic devices, engaged, productively or recreationally, with other human beings. Some are engaged, but how many are just mindlessly scrolling addictive algorithmically curated trash?
I think this article overstates how underdeveloped Paleolithic peoples were. For example, regarding shelters, we see teepees, yurts and tents as primitive shelters, but compared to living in a cave or sleeping in the open, it is very advanced. We take for granted that invention is a clear, isolated concept. But previous to the modern age, invention was intertwined with tradition. Creating a society which could even adopt tent life involved developing traditions around how the tent was made, who made it, how it was maintained, and how it was passed on. Each new invention and small innovation to the tent had to be integrated through tradition, adopted over generations, and in this way mass-tested. What it takes to develop the ability to mass-produce a specialized, portable system of shelter, without the concept of engineering, is thousands of years of tradition. But eventually you end up with this specialized invention, highly attuned to a way of life. Yet to us it is deceptively simple.
Yeah, whenever I see pre-modern tools, clothing, shelter, I always think it's amazing, and wonder at how much they must know to make it all work.
I wonder how much traditionalism played a role. Would a person suggesting a teepee instead of a cave, or sleeping in the open be murdered for sacrilege? Innovation is an antisocial act to some extent. By innovating, you are saying someone is either wrong or less competent than you in some area. You are also challenging traditional roles and systems of social organization. I think people take knowledge for granted. It's really easy to understand something. It's really hard to be the first person to think of something and prove it. Take calculus, for example. It's easy to understand and learn the basics of it. A ton of people do in HS, even earlier in some countries. But it is extremely hard to be Newton and think about it first and prove it.
More like Newton's knowledge and proofs survived. The folks who did before, they didn't have the printing press.
Neither did Euclid, and his stuff survived. There are early not quite calculus ideas in Aristotle, which lends even more weight to thinking that they didn't get all the way there. If they had, and the Aristotelian stuff survived, why didn't the fully worked out stuff survive?
But it is extremely hard to be Newton and think about it first and prove it. Unless you're Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Or Darwin and Wallace. Which suggests these ideas might be a product of their zeitgeist, with a number of contemporaries bordering on being the first to publish.
So why didn't that occur much earlier in history?
Because there was no way to make money on it. Before the age of discovery, there wasn't much money in being able to find out one's coordinates in the open sea. And age of discovery only started because a long grinding war to liberate Spain and Portugal from Muslims had to finish first to provide both economic base for seafaring and safety of sailing too. And maths mainly developed for the goal of improving navigation.
Human societies never destabilized the entire global ecosystem before either. Viewing it as progress to be able to cause climate change, mass extinction and pollution is a bias that we should check. This article takes a lot of essentialist positions based on a single point of data. The Yanomami. Single point of data as a counterpoint. The Mosyo people, who are a matriarchal society. Viewing other cultures as primitive and current society as advanced is a long discarded idea in anthropology due to ethnocentrism and racism. This is also incorrect. The default condition of humans is no different from the default condition of other animals. Males fight each other over females. Male bonobos will have sex with each other as a way to diffuse tensions, for instance, and male wolves and lions will form groups to support each other.
Really good article, and yet another newsletter blog I feel compelled to subscribe to, yet probably never read. Sigh. What Chanyon actually said when he reported about men making war over women was that man actually is an animal among other animals. I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of the GPTs. A considerable amount of the Sturm und Drang around this tech is centered on the question of how close to human intelligence they are, and or whether or not it knows anything, etc. All of these questions seem to smuggle in the assumption that we humans are special in some intrinsic sense. I think what the GPTs are beginning to reveal is that they're not reaching some new threshold of humanness, but rather that we humans are not as special, i.e. separate or above nature, as we like to think.
What exactly did you find good about the article? Sounds like the author just overextended observations from one tribe to all of human history. Maybe it's true, but it sure as hell ain't substantiated. So we invented tools, discovered fire, and then just went back to dragging women by their hair to caves for 500k years. Or maybe there's more nuance in it.
Flagged.